Do you have an internal monologue? Do you talk to yourself? And if so, in what language?
I want to say I don't think I do. Um, yeah, I don't think I do. I mean, I think obviously, and I think quite a bit. Um, but it doesn't, I wouldn't call it a monologue. I don't feel like I'm talking to myself. I think I'm just thinking. Um,
And
and what language? Yeah.
so if it's not a monologue, do you find yourself thinking visually? Is it in pictures or movies?
Again, I don't think so. I don't think it is very visual. I've Yeah, I find it hard to think about this. Like I find it hard to think about what goes on when I'm thinking. I feel like other people have more clarity on that than I do. I want to say that it tends to be a sequence of things that, so if I do this, then would that happen? Or if I do this, then would that happen? Sometimes it's also just letting something mull in my head, where it's just at the back of my mind. I haven't been able to quite figure it out. I feel like I don't have a good grip on the situation and I just need to let it be and let it stay in my head for a few days. And I feel like I might get some clarity from somewhere, or just it will kind of fall into some local minima that feels comfortable. Um, yeah, I think that's the best I have.
Do you have an internal monologue, Ray? Do you talk to yourself? And if so, in what language?
That's an odd question. I think I haven't studied the literature on this, but yeah, I think we all do. And I think we do it in natural language, which I guess is one of my reasons why I've always been somewhat of an NLP person, because in my mind, it's hard to separate language and thought. At least in my internal monologue, it's always in natural language. And, I think, natural language is a lot about how people became symbolic reasoners, right? Was by forming this discrete communication code that we use. And so I think language and reasoning are very close together in a lot of ways. But I'm not bilingual. I had 4 years of Spanish in high school. I'm not fluent in any other language. So I've never had the experience of trying to think in another language, because I've never known another language, you know, well enough to think in it. So I think someone who truly is bilingual would be in a better position maybe than me to answer this question, because my internal dialogue has always been in English.
Do you have an internal monologue? Do you talk to yourself? And if so, in what language?
I find myself talking to myself if like preparing to give a talk, or thinking about things that require verbalizing things. Otherwise, I don't think I talk, not in any like natural language sense of talking to myself.
Interesting. And are you a visual thinker? Do you have pictures, moving pictures, abstract shapes?
No, I don't think, I don't know. I mean, I find, so for example, when thinking about, like I do a lot of rolling out hypotheticals, I think, and kind of like imagining this or that. And even if it's just kind of like a low possibility thing, like, I will think through different possibilities of things. And then like in a research context, I will think a lot about, like algorithms and processes and sequences of things and whatnot. But I find it's a challenge to go from like, okay, I think I've figured it out, or like, I think I know how to do this thing, to writing it down like writing the math behind it or writing the code behind it or something. It's a conscious process to translate from whatever the internal language is to something that's sort of understandable by others.
Do you have an internal monologue? Do you talk to yourself?
I do. I mean, the worst moment of my day each day, that about half an hour every night before I sleep. That's the part that I actually have quite a bit of monologue with myself, kind of, let's say, essentially like blaming myself for whatever I did or did whatever I didn't that day, and then trying to argue for or against why I did it, why I didn't do that. So yeah, that's perhaps the only time I have that kind of monologue, but otherwise not really. Yeah.
And in what language is this monologue?
Yeah, that's so. Let me see. So it depends on which language I was using when I was doing or did not doing. So for instance, when it's related to my work or the research or science, it tends to be English. But if it's about idea, oh, I should have called my mom, or I should have called my family or friends, then depending on what language they use, but usually my mom is Korean, so I would speak Korean with her. So then in that case, I actually talk to myself in Korean. So I think there is context dependent.
Context dependent. Interesting. Yeah. And are you a visual thinker? Do you have pictures, moving pictures, symbols in your mind?
No, not really. I'm very, let's say, textual.
Do you have an internal monologue? Do you talk to yourself?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I talk to myself a lot, and think about different things. Yeah, that's.
And in what language?
In Farsi. and yeah, actually it depends on the context. Sometimes in Farsi, sometimes in English. So that's yeah.
Yeah. And are you a visual thinker? Do you have symbols, pictures, moving pictures in your mind?
Yeah, like visually, everything. Like I have like visual grounding for everything.
That's great. And it's multimodal. There are tokens and pictures, and there's cross attention between them.
No, it's just pictures.
Do you have an internal monologue? Do you talk to yourself?
Not really. I don't know, actually. I don't know if I've thought about that before. Yeah, not so much, I don't think. But I do like to, I love going on walks or hikes in nature, and I probably think to myself while I'm doing that. But I don't know, I also like to listen to audiobooks, so it's hard to say.
And are you a visual thinker? Do you have pictures, moving pictures, scenarios that play out in your head that you can see?
No, not really. I think I'm more auditory. Like I really love talking to people. So that's why you said, do you have an internal monologue? Maybe, but more often it's like I need to find someone else to sit there and let me talk to them, which is sort of my internal monologue.
Makes sense. I often find that sometimes complicated ideas make sense on their way out of my mouth. Like when I'm trying to express the token and what words to use, that's when it finally sort of clicks in.
Exactly. That's exactly how I am. It's like so strange. I'm not exactly sure why it doesn't make as much sense until I'm forced to like fully articulate it to another person.
It's the compression effects of a linear expression mechanism. Do you have an internal monologue? Do you talk to yourself?
It's funny. I was sort of walking somewhere the other day, and I was remembering that when I was younger, I definitely, and I know this is terrible. I shouldn't admit this, but I was thinking there are people who narrate their lives in their heads as if the the 50-year-old man loped easily down the street, And then I was thinking, I'm glad I haven't done that for a while. Although clearly I was doing that at the point when but I was remembering when I was younger, there was a lot of that. I think that's what you might mean.
Well, so there's the third person narration, but there's also just thinking through language or just thinking through sentences.
Yes. So when I'm writing a paper, I still like to try to do it all in one sitting.
Mm.
All right, I'm no longer like literally the night before, but I really like the idea that I'm going to start at the, this is totally the wrong thing to do. And by the way, I don't do this for theory sections. So when I'm writing a paper, I write down equation 1, equation 2, equation 3. Those are like really important. They have to be right. They have to be just the right level of granularity. And I write explicatory bits and pieces, but the kind of the whole intro and the whole quite a lot of the text I just play forward in my mind for weeks beforehand. Sort of playing, and those are real sentences, right? And I think those sentences are part of a thought process. I mean, clearly they're intended to go down on the page, so they're different from sentences. And then if I'm trying to solve like a vision problem, I think it is probably more geometry. I mean, obviously I've worked in geometry a lot, so that fits naturally. I also, I think in code quite a lot. I think people would joke that, I sometimes speak in code. I mean, like computer code, I definitely think what is the execution sequence that will achieve, what's going to happen in the computer.
And you find that you can move bits and pieces of code around, and like you can do that in a functional, abstract manner.
I think so. I think probably that's the thing that I'm sort of weirdly best at, is understanding how computers work. That's like I have a real feel for what the computer's doing. And so I said code, but the code isn't really there. But it's just kind of the evolution of the data structures over time, let's say, yeah.
And you already alluded to this, but it sounds like you do a lot of visual thinking as well. You have pictures in your mind and geometry, and like you're able to. Is that a common framework?
Yeah, I think so. I still. I remember when I was working with AZ with Andrew Zisserman, he's like totally pictures in mind, and there's a fantastic tool we have, which is called mathematics and algebra and symbolic mathematics, where I just remember thinking, okay, well, I can't think it through. I'm going to have to just do a derivation, and that's on paper, and it has to be on paper. And I could never understand how Stephen Hawking could do that in his head. So I don't want to say that symbolic mathematics is a second-class citizen, because I think it's too often said, oh, you can't make any progress unless you can visualize it. I mean, we have fantastic tools for helping us think through things too big for our brains, and code is even better, right? Mathematics has the disadvantage that it's ambiguous, poorly specified, means different things to different people. It's a terrible tool, mathematics. Whereas
I'm sure mathematicians would disagree that it's ambiguous, that it's a terrible tool.
Well, look at equation 1 of 100 computer vision papers. It's often wrong, right? Even in accepted papers. Now, what do I mean by wrong? I just mean, oh, this variable on the left-hand side wasn't, used on the right-hand side, or this, these terms on the right-hand side are not defined anywhere above here in the document, right? There's no, it's just, but hey, we all know what we mean, let a Markov random field be, or whatever. So, whereas if you do that to a computer, it'll say, yeah, sorry, I don't know what I is. And you'll say, stupid computer, it's an integer, right, that I'm using to. It's like, thanks, okay, thanks, I understand you now. Calm down, says the computer. I just wanted to know what it was. And that's what I mean. I love it that code is utterly unambiguous. It's unambiguous in the sense that it does the thing that it says it was going to do. So toy examples, as I mentioned earlier, a key part of how I think about things. Trying to think of a good toy example is sometimes a geometric question.
Fascinating. Do you have an internal monologue? Do you talk to yourself in your head?
I think so.
And in what language?
In Greek.
That
happens in Greek. I feel, I don't think I don't think I can think in English.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
Are you a visual thinker? Are there pictures, plots, moving pictures, scenarios?
When I think of food, I visualize it.
Okay.
No, I don't. Yeah, no, I don't think so. I think no, I don't think I'm a visual thinker.
Hmm. Do you have an internal monologue? Do you talk to yourself in your head?
Yeah, definitely. I definitely talk to myself a lot, but not necessarily in my head. Also
Okay,
out
out
loud.
loud.
Yeah.
Okay, you have an external monologue.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. And in what language is this?
That's a good one. I think that depends on who I was talking to last. So I have a tough time switching languages. So if I have to talking to my parents, which I talk in Hindi to them, afterwards I continue thinking in Hindi for some time. And sometimes I will talk to my husband in Hindi who doesn't speak Hindi afterwards. And then, then I will switch to English and then everything will stick in English for some time. But it's kind of, yeah, dependent on who I talk to last.
Interesting. There are, subcultures, and which are, some of them are even popular in India, where people code switch, so switch between languages in the middle of a sentence. You found that you've never done that.
Yeah, no, I actually have a tough time switching between languages. I have noticed this as compared to other people. Yeah, it's like my brain switches modes and then it's just talking and thinking in that mode and then it goes to the other mode and thinks in that mode sort of. I think I always go back to English eventually at this point. But yeah, if I had just recently talked to people in Hindi, then I would probably think in Hindi for some time.
And are you a visual thinker? Do you have symbols, pictures, moving pictures, scenarios in your head? No maps, no plans happening on maps. Oh, no search trees.
I hate maps. No. I mean, if you showed me a map, I would probably close my eyes and think without it. Just saying. No, I don't think I think visually. I think I just think.
I see. Do you have an internal monologue? Do you talk to yourself?
That's a very good point. Yes.
And
not only yes, I'm also bilingual. I mean, everybody from India is trilingual. So
I'm only bilingual. Sorry.
You're only bilingual. I'm trilingual too.
Yeah.
I also know Hindi, and English and Telugu, and now a little bit of Bengali. And so the interesting thing actually is, what language do I speak to myself in? I mean, again, I speak, I don't necessarily, I think I no longer speak to myself aloud, that much I don't do. But I think when I was a kid, probably I was even talking aloud to myself. But, it was interesting to me as to which language. So I grew up speaking Telugu, and then I only started sort of using English when I went to IIT Madras, where I had to kind of slowly figure out how to speak back when somebody speaks to you in English. And so I would basically do everything in Telugu and translate it. So, and I could almost see the wheels cranking. My favorite story is one time somebody said hi while I was passing by in the first year at IIT. I had to stop my bike, try to process what they said, try to figure out why they are saying it, try to figure out what to say in English. By that time, they were gone. And so I didn't have to say hi back anyway. But, this thing, I used to think in Telugu. Now I think I talk to myself in English, which is kind of sad. But, it's it's an interesting, if you have an internal monologue, what language is it? So, so the answer to your question is, not only do I have an internal monologue, I analyze it to see which language I do it in. So, yeah.
That's good.
The strange thing is that my son has that too. When he was a kid, he would be happily talking to himself, in his room. And, I don't actually remember talking to myself loud, but I actually have very vivid memories of my son talking to himself loud. And yeah, but I think I no longer know whether he has internal monologue himself, but I certainly do. So, yeah.
And are you a visual thinker? Do you have pictures, motion pictures, scenarios playing out in your head?
No, actually, I'm a linguistic thinker. I'm actually, I'm extremely bad at, well, I don't, I mean, I'm at least depending on if you think in terms of things like the mental rotation, sorts of things, I mean, if any exam was based on mental rotation, I would have flunked it. And, I mean, I'm very bad at those things. But I mean, obviously we visualize, and I have like very vivid dreams. Every night, I have just so many dreams, and, obviously they're all visual. Dreams are visual, but in terms of thinking, it is both linguistic and visual. It's not, I'm saying not just visual, because I don't think I have the actual capability to do mental rotation as well as many other people I know, for example. So, but I mean, pretty much sort of, you're having this conversation, not conversation necessarily, you're thinking these things out in head. And yeah, pretty much even things that you write, it happens to me. I mean, when, it basically ideas come, it's like there was this, I said the Seinfeld, I mean, so there was a Seinfeld episode where he's asleep and he gets this great idea, he gets up and writes, and then that about the joke, and then he wakes up, and next day tries to figure out what he wrote because he doesn't know what he wrote. This happens to the part about waking up in the middle of the night because I had to write down what I was thinking, happens to me. So I think I'm basically, there is a general, it doesn't have to, it's not like Fermat's last theorem proof that Andrew Wiles kind of thing. It's just even simple things like, what might I want to write to somebody? It'll just be in the back of the head, and you'd be thinking. So yeah, I think it certainly, I do have an internal monologue and do that. Yeah.
Do you have an internal monologue?
No. Other people around me do. I don't. I mean, not actual. Yeah, I don't have an actual voice. I think a lot in my head, but I don't think it's actual words. I don't know if that counts.
What do the thoughts feel like? Are they're not words? Are they just, for example, are they pictures? Are they scenarios? Are they
probably along that line? They're, I don't know, experiences, maybe visuals, settings, environments, actions, decisions, more than, I don't know what other people's monologues are. So I don't know if how standard mine is, but it's usually not complete sentences, not complete thoughts, more like associations, I suppose.
Search trees.
Sorry?
Search trees?
Search trees, maybe, yeah, maybe. That makes sense. Intuitive search trees, yeah. Or like feeling around in the dark, kind of search trees, I suppose.
Feeling around in the dark.
Well, it's more like feeling type dialogue, not feeling like emotional feeling, but more like sensing type dialogue than verbal dialogue. I don't know if that makes any sort of sense.
Somewhat. I actually do have a voice with sentences, so I can't fully relate to abstract dialogue, but I sometimes have thoughts that are more like scenarios playing out where there is no monologue. So maybe it's something like that.
Right. Yeah.
Do you have an internal monologue? Do you talk to yourself?
Oh yeah, very much so. Oh, yeah.
And in what language?
In English. Yeah, very much. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. Are you bilingual?
I am, but I'm very well. I am, but I'm like, English is my mother tongue, and yeah, I very much think in English. I'm much more comfortable in English than I am in French. I think, I mean, that's one of the, so in Montreal, I find like we have lots of friends where around the table we're speaking French. In fact, around our own table often we're speaking French. And with my kids, I don't really experience much of a deficit. Right? For whatever reason, I speak with my kids in French, and that's
that works out fine. Although more and more I'm speaking English with my kids actually, which it's kind of interesting. And they're the ones that are sort of initiating this now. It's kind of funny because they're all francophone, and that's their mother tongue. But with friends, I often find that I'm kind of I feel like I'm operating at a lower IQ in French than I am in English, and I feel that I miss those extra IQ points sometimes. Yeah.
But it's beyond the phase where you can feel yourself translating. It's not that.
Yeah, it's not quite that, but I make lots of mistakes in French. I mean, there's lots of things that I make lots of mistakes. You know, I used to, when I would teach in French, I don't teach that much in French anymore because our classes are often mixed between McGill, which is an mainly English language university, and University of Montreal at the grad level. But when I taught undergrad courses, that would at the University of Montreal, that would be in French. And when I started, I would often begin with a kind of an apology for what I'm about to do to your language. But yeah, no, I mean the students are actually really good about it, right? They're there to learn, and they're pretty understanding. So yeah, I've never had any problems with that. But yeah, so very much English though when I'm thinking my own internal monologue. Yeah.
And are you a visual thinker? Do you have pictures, diagrams, search trees in your head?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a language dialogue, but I do tend to think visually as well. I think I'm kind of slightly more visual thinker than not, right? So when I'm trying to work something out, right, either in math or I'm trying to build something, like physically trying to build something, I'm often trying to visualize it. Yeah.
And you have an easy time translating coordinates and rotating maps in your head and things like that.
Yeah. I would imagine that's pretty common amongst people in our field.
Oh, you'd be surprised.
Really? Oh wow. Okay. I guess so. Huh.
Or at least subject to the sampling bias of the people chosen here. But yeah.
Oh really? Oh yeah. I guess I would be surprised. That's interesting. Huh. Yeah, I think well, between Joel and I would say I'm more visual than Joel.
Mm-hmm. Do you have an internal monologue?
So I have almost an exclusively external monologue, which is maybe what has been evidenced by this whole discussion.
Well, I mean, this is supposed to be largely a one-sided conversation.
Yeah, but I think that also these kinds of stories that I'm telling about failing publicly or whatever else, it's the way that I deal with things is that I basically just talk about them, and I almost basically never talk about them to myself. I talk about them to everyone else. I probably should spend more time thinking inside my own head, but yeah. So I do. So the actual answer to the question is yes, I have an internal monologue. But the also answer to the question, which I think everyone who knows me realizes, is that it's very hard for me to shut up because I tend not to run that internal monologue. I tend to just say it, and so then once it's out of my mouth and I hear it, I then say oh, is that actually what I think? Is that actually? And it's and then I have to reason about the whole thing out loud. My wife's the exact opposite. She does everything internally. And so during this house buying process, every single time that my mood changes about something, I say it. I'm oh yeah, I do. I think I do like it. Or maybe I'm writing it off. And she's I feel please stop. Just tell me, make up your mind and then tell me how you feel. And I'm we're currently running the sampling procedure together.
That is hilarious. You are watching the process unfold live.
That's right.
You may as well be seeing the neurons fire.
That's right. And she's I don't want to see it. Go figure it out and come back to me.
Hey man, transparency is a thing. It's a virtue.
That's why I said it. I'd rather not have secrets. It's much easier for me just to assume that everyone knows everything. Then I never have to oh, did I tell that person that no, it's just yeah. Much simpler.
And are you a visual thinker? Do you have pictures, maps, symbols, search trees, movies in your head?
Yeah, I generally speaking, that's how I reason about a lot of things. And sometimes that manifests in terms of you know, in terms of gestures and things like this. It's it it so it's frustrating sometimes because then you have like a thought and you can't articulate it. And so you're like, I don't know what to use to do this. And I never really spent the time to become artistic. And sometimes I wish that I had. Like I'm pretty decent at like vector graphics kinds of programs, but not with like an actual pen and paper. And when we were kids, my parents took a very we had like a sort of gender neutral upbringing. So the idea was that anything that my sister was exposed to, I was going to be exposed to, and vice versa. And so we ended up basically like, so we would both go to art camp together. We both went to like science camp together. She hated one, like, I liked whatever. But it meant that we had to sort of balance. And so I did go to like a bunch of like art camps with her, and I was always jealous of being able to articulate, since there were these kinds of more abstract or sometimes pictographic notions in my brain. I was really jealous of the fact that she could actually like translate that down and sort of out in a way that I couldn't. But I talk really quickly, and I was pretty decent at talking, and that was getting me most of what I wanted. But I do sort of still feel like I missed out on that. And so sometimes you viz things, and you're like, oh, I can like totally picture this in my mind's eye, but actually manifesting it is very difficult, and describing it is quite difficult. And so I do like computer programs help a little bit in that regard. Like drawing straight lines is easier on a computer, but yeah. So it's kind of a mix. But generally speaking, I do really like pictographic and visualizations of things more so than words. I don't really like reading.
Do you have an internal monologue?
That's interesting. I think I read that thread once about how some people don't. I think I don't. I don't know. I don't know what that would look like. It doesn't feel like in movies. Like where, yeah. I don't know.
So when you're thinking, you're not thinking in words, or do you talk to yourself when you're thinking?
I don't think I do. No, I don't think I have I don't think I have a verbal part to that in my head. No.
Interesting. Are you a visual thinker? Do you have like diagrams, pictures?
Yeah, I'm definitely a very visual thinker and teacher. I like having diagrams. I like having, kind of spatial representations. Yeah, I often try to teach on my iPad or somewhere where I can make drawings as I go.
And you find you're able to like mentally rotate and maps and like coordinate systems and things like that?
I think so, although I was teaching a class last semester on it was basically a systems course for machine learning. So it's about the kind of internals of PyTorch and TensorFlow at a kind of like low level. I constantly had all these diagrams that I was making, and it made me realize how little I actually think about, I don't know, rotating tensors or the kind of visual structure of tensors. And I wasn't great at it. I often made mistakes in getting the dimensions wrong. So yes, I guess maybe in 2D, but not 3D, I can think. Yeah.
Interesting. Maybe that was the motivation behind named tensors.
Yeah, right. Yeah, right. Named tensors are explicitly geometric. Yeah.
Do you have an internal monologue?
No. No, I almost never hear myself in my head. This was a point of surprise and discussion with my spouse early on. Yeah, very, very little of my own voice goes on up there.
Are you a visual thinker? Do you have diagrams, pictures?
So it's much more sort of concepts in space.
And you can find that you can perform coordinate system transformations and rotations of maps in your head easily?
Yeah, reasonably well for all that stuff. Sort of spatial thinking all works out fine. I can't remember faces very well, which is a constant sort of annoyance where someone will wave at me and I won't know who they are because I didn't store that very well, and then I'll feel bad.
Are you a visual thinker then? Do you have pictures, diagrams?
I think more so, yeah. And before I did computer science, I did maths, and I definitely found, most of maths was some sort of spatial mapping of if the problem indeed wasn't geometry, then it would involve some sort of approximate mapping of things into some space, and then thinking about them there, and then putting it back into symbols.
And you find you're able to like mentally rotate maps and change coordinate systems?
Well, I guess I don't know if I'm like exceptional at that, but I guess I would pass the whatever they are on the IQ tests, the Roger Shepard psychology tests. They're very nice. Yeah, I think I could do okay at those.
Do you have an internal monologue? Do you talk to yourself in your head?
Not necessarily, although my wife will tell you that I do this all the time, but I don't feel like I do this. But
she finds you speaking out loud as you're thinking through things?
No, I mean she finds me lost in my thoughts.
Okay.
Or not listening when she speaks. So I'm accused of that. I'll not tell you how I plead, but that's what I'm accused of.
And when you are lost in thinking, is that thinking verbal or more visual? Do you find yourself thinking in pictures and diagrams, or do you find yourself thinking in words and sentences?
No, I think it's more visual. I'm more of a quiet person when I'm thinking.
And you're good at, for example, mentally rotating maps and coordinate systems in your head?
Not sure, but I'm good at basically visualizing concepts in figures, trying to find analogs of real life situations and what a geometric interpretation of the problem at hand.
Do you have an internal monologue? Do you find yourself talking to yourself in your head?
I don't talk to myself. Maybe I'll be a happier person if I had somebody to talk to. Maybe myself, maybe, but then I'll be pretty boring. But I do a lot of simulation. I would say that it goes back to what we were talking about with decision making. I think I do kind of rollouts and think about what alternatives are for things. Is that an internal model?
Yeah, I would call that an internal model. I think Kenneth Clark's classical quote of like on the nature of explanations, I would call that an internal model where you can do rollouts, you can get a value for your action sequences and outcomes. Are these internal models and internal simulations, are they visual in nature? Like, do you end up visualizing scenarios or?
It's a funny thing. So I'll digress and I'll come back to it. One thing that I'm not as good at as other people at is concrete math. So, and memory. So it took me a long time to answer your first question, but so I'm not great at, like, for example, if you tell me a number to remember or whatever, I'll forget. And I'll forget a lot of stuff. I think memory-wise, I'm pretty selective. But I'm pretty good at abstract math. So X and Y's are great. Once you ground X as 20 and you ground Y as 23, then you go into dangerous territory. And so coming back to, and again, even like some people are really good at summing a bunch of numbers and so on. I'm pretty good at that, but the way, circling back to cognitive MLP, the way I do it is I kind of round them and then I add them together. So, if you said like, what's 1,523 plus 2,343 plus whatever, I'd be like, okay, that's about 1,500 plus 2,000 plus, okay, about 8,000 or something. That's kind of like how I approach math. And so when you talk about the mental model, whether it's visual or not, I think I'm a pretty visual person. Sometimes I visualize it, but it also falls into this kind of abstraction piece where one gets labeled as X, gets like blurred into X, and then one gets blurred into Y, and these are the options, and the rest is just details. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of how I roll out. Does that make sense or not?
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
So I guess I live a life through blurry eyes or something.
Well, you live in latent spaces.
I live in yeah, but it's like latent spaces with a small number of bits. All right, so that's the summary of it.
Do you have an internal monologue? Do you find yourself talking? Do you have an internal voice? Do you talk to yourself?
I certainly do when I'm playing sports. I think I find myself I think the answer is I have an occasional internal monologue that a voice that speaks up when I'm trying to remind myself what to do in a particular moment. But most of the time, the internal voice is quiet. At least that's how I experience it. I don't know. I'd have to actually have to think a lot more about that. But I think the answer is I must, because it speaks up. Maybe I'm just not listening to it most of the time. Maybe that's what's happening. But I do occasionally sit there and go, Charles, you need to do this, or this is the thing that you have to do, or what is it I really need to do next? So maybe I'm just talking out loud when I do that. So I don't know. I want to say occasionally.
And it's in English.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I used to dream in Spanish.
Interesting.
Yes, as when I was so I started learning Spanish in 8th grade, and I actually minored in Spanish. So I did my undergrad in what was then called information and computer science, but I minored in what we would now call cognitive science, but we didn't at the time, Spanish and history of the 1960s. And when I was fluent, which was a long time ago. So it turns out if you don't speak a language for like 15 or 20 years, you like lose some of the vocabulary. But I used to dream in Spanish. It was great. I don't anymore. But yes, it's insofar as there is an inner voice, it is definitely in English.
Interesting.
Wasn't always. Yeah.
Interesting. And the dreams in Spanish involved other people speaking Spanish as well, and you conversing in Spanish.
That's how I interpreted it. You know, dreams have their own logic, right? Like it's not even clear there's dialogue happening.
Yeah,
like, it's more like dialogue happened. And yeah, I thought of them as happening in Spanish. It's kind of like when I used to speak multiple languages, well, really just Spanish and English. So long as I didn't think about the fact that I was speaking in the language, it worked. And the moment I realized I was speaking in the language, it would fall apart because I would start translating in my head. It was a lot like that. It didn't feel like, it wasn't so much that I was speaking in Spanish or people around me were speaking in Spanish. It was that things were happening in Spanish.
Yep.
They just were. And there was no real distinction other than occasionally the realization that it was happening in Spanish.
And are you a visual thinker? Do you think in pictures, diagrams, search trees?
I think in abstract graphs.
Okay.
Imagine circles and dots and whatever, and they occasionally have a kind of like visual thing in front of me, but it's about relationship. I think in relationships, I think, and abstractions. In fact, yeah, you will know this, but there's a there's a web page that has the org chart for the College of Computing. I make that org chart.
I see.
I find the pictures. I change the layout. All of that is me. Because
why?
Because I like it. So for two reasons. One, it means I actually know who's in the college, which I used to know everything, but I don't know, as time goes on, you just know fewer and fewer people because newer people come and go and whatever. So this way I know. So for example, you probably wouldn't know this, but there's the HR people have a little kind of mailing list that tracks every person who comes and every person who goes. It's onboarding and offboarding and these whatever. And I ask to be on that list so that I know every time someone arrives and every time someone leaves, just to get sort of in my head what's sort of happening to the graph that's in my head. And I put graphs together because it's a way that I think about the relationships between people and organizations. So it's split up across 6 pages, and it's split up the way it's split up because that's how I think about the organization. And I want to move those things around and kind of see the way the data structures relate to one another. So I guess that makes me a visual thinker, but really it's about relationships between entities.
Yeah, makes sense.
That makes me sound like a nerd, but anyway, it's what I do for fun.
Yeah. On the one hand, my mind is blown that we're letting you directly edit the website and taking your time away from other things that you're doing. But on the other hand, it makes you happy. It gives you a sense for who everybody is. So it makes sense.
You want to hear something crazy? So I won't bore you with the details, but we got asked a question about compliance that I found out about, long story. But anyway, there's a handbook. There's a College of Computing handbook, which you can get to from the intranet. I know you've read it multiple times. And I actually wrote most of it originally when I was in my 2 previous jobs ago, because we needed to have one. And I realized yesterday, it was literally yesterday, when I got asked this question, that it hadn't been updated in like 5 years. Most of this stuff doesn't need to be updated, but like there's this whole section about who the dean is and who the associate deans are, and a few things about the what the portfolios of the associate deans are. And I realized, man, this hasn't been updated in years. So while being in another meeting, I went in and I edited the whole handbook and rewrote it to reflect the current state of affairs. Not because I don't have anything to do, but because it needed to reflect what was actually going on, because that's the purpose of that handbook. So, and it helped me. I said, you know what, this is an excuse for me to think about how things have changed in the last 5 years and whether things we have written down no longer make sense. And so it was a very useful exercise to me. I can't do these kinds of things every day or even every week or probably even every month, but some things that give you a way to kind of give you an anchor to what's happening, a sort of reminder. And by the way, really nice, a reminder of how things have changed. It's a really important kind of sanity check that you're still heading in the direction that you thought you were headed. So there you go. You're right. I shouldn't be doing any of that stuff. But of all the things I shouldn't be doing, that's a thing that I'm okay with doing.
Well put. Do you have an internal monologue? Do you find yourself talking to yourself in your head?
Oh, I am very sure. I mean, yes and no. I'm not in natural language. I think in vectors. If I say this, some people really feel like, what? You cannot say that. Some colleagues told me that, no, you're thinking in logical symbols, not neural vectors.
I like how other people can tell you what is going on in your brain. That's interesting.
Well, but I'm pretty sure that's not, I'm pretty sure, because for the following reason, like you must have this experience as well. Sometimes, you read a paper, student prepared, and then you don't like something somewhere, but you know that you want to revise it, or you know how to revise it, but don't you sometimes just struggle a little bit to explain like what's wrong with that exactly? Because I have that problem often, especially when it's very subjective, judgmental thing that maybe a little bit hard to prove what's wrong with that versus this way of saying the same thing.
Mm.
Yeah, so for
So
those cases, I feel like I have a feeling or judgments first, intuition first, and then I have to explain it in natural language. And sometimes I struggle quite a bit to articulate what I have in mind.
And the intuition, so you find that it's not natural language, but is it visual then? Do you find yourself thinking in diagrams, search trees, graphs, or is it more abstract?
Search trees. I'm very sure that I'm doing like A* search with the proof of guarantees with large beam size. Who knows? But,
yeah. Or is it more abstract than that? That it's model free. There is a decision that you become aware of, and then you're struggling for the path for how do you got there.
Probably it's fairly abstract. I don't know if I visualize at least what I'm thinking. But if I'm writing like scribbling my idea on a note for the purpose of sharing with someone else, then I might then try to visualize it a bit better.
And are you good at maps and rotating maps and 3D coordinate systems in your head?
Oh, may not be worse than the average. I mean, there were some tests like that when I was a child, and I think I was better on the better side, but I have no reason to believe that I'm particularly exceptional at that. But I was once told by high school teacher that maybe I could really consider being an artist for sculpture, because so that requires a bit of imaginary 3D model in your head, because you need to remove the part that doesn't belong there.
Yeah.
But I didn't have the heart for it, so didn't develop that aspect of a brain. So probably at this time, maybe it's all gone. Who knows?